Hello, Yinka. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm good.
Great. You were
Mhm.
born in London.
Yes.
I don't know, maybe I'm mistaken, from a Ghanaian mother and a Jamaican father, or the other way around?
No, you're right. That's it.
All right.
Yes. Mm.
And you started dancing at the age of 5, but I know that you didn't only live in London, but in different countries. So among them, like Nicaragua, Cuba, Guadeloupe, and Spain now for more than 13 years.
Yes, absolutely. I've been in Spain now for about, I think it's 16 now.
Now
Yes.
16. Wow, wow.
I
So
know.
let's go back to your childhood. So when you started dancing, you were 5, but
Mm.
is it true this story? I read somewhere that you started dancing because you saw Nicaraguan dancer and when you
Ah,
went back home, you started to mimic their dance.
yes. This is something that my parents tell me because I don't have a memory of this. And I think I was about 3 years old, and we were living in Nicaragua, in Managua, which is on the Pacific coast of Nicaragua, and we went to Bluefields, which is on the Caribbean coast, the Atlantic coast, and it's a part of Nicaragua where there's a large sort of African descendant community, and they had a carnival there.
Mhm.
And apparently, when we went back to Managua, I was copying all the different dances that I saw. And I think that from then my parents had a sense that dance would be something that I liked. So I started taking dance classes. And I don't know if my first dance classes were maybe in England and then
Mhm.
in Guadeloupe. I do have memories of taking dance classes in Guadeloupe, where I lived between the ages of 5 and 8, I think. And then when I went back to England, I was doing ballet. I did some Senegalese dancing at one point, and jazz modern. And then when I moved to Cuba, so I was 17, 18 when I lived in Cuba on like a gap year before starting university. And there I was taken in, and this wasn't like my intention when I went, but I ended up dancing with Afro-Cuban dance troupe called Ikache in Santiago de Cuba. So it was like a hobby, just something that I enjoyed. I didn't then decide to study dance. I studied history of art at university, and it was when I was at university that I first took my flamenco classes. I think I tried some before, but not in a continuous way. And so that was when this whole journey with flamenco started. And in reality, I think that it's just been a process of things happening that have made me then go onto the stage. I didn't join, it wasn't a conservatory. There was never a sense of like, you will graduate as a professional dancer. No, that's just kind of happened through my experiences, the different people I've worked with, and obviously my desire to just improve and understand more.
Okay, so like you said, flamenco came like a bit later. So why flamenco? Were you attracted by flamenco because of your experience, maybe with those African Cuban dance when you were younger, or something happened after your studies? Like because you said you graduated in history of art. What happened there at that moment? I think you were 21 when you really
Exactly.
started flamenco. So what happened there?
Um, the way I understand it is that um, now in retrospect, I can look back and potentially see that there's clearly something in flamenco that attracted me on a sort of on an embodied level, and potentially, its sort of hidden Africanness is something that now has opened up the whole world for me. But when I first started, I think it did feel familiar, but from a very like innocent place. I had no idea about everything that now I know since I've lived in the south of Spain in particular. Because when I lived in Barcelona, when I lived in Madrid, I didn't feel the same sense that Andalusia has in terms of like the spaces, um, the cities here. Um, and so I think yeah, it was a sort of unknown, like, desire to follow a sensation as opposed to me recognizing, like, oh, that seems, you know, that seems like it might be connected. That wasn't happening at all. It was really, maybe it was happening on a subconscious level, but on a conscious level, I just very innocently enjoyed the act of taking classes of flamenco. Obviously, because it's quite complex, it's something that you then have to kind of learn more about. And my teacher in England told me about her teachers in Barcelona, so I went there. But then I was meant to go and work in the States because I was still thinking of working in the arts, in like production, curatorial work, um, and and that didn't work out. So I ended up deciding that I wanted to move to Madrid, just as something that I was like I would regret not having learned how to dance flamenco, but not ever thinking that that would then like change my whole life and I'd become a flamenco dancer.
Yeah, because I don't think that a lot of people know that flamenco has all those influence.
Mm-hmm,
People
mm-hmm,
just think about like it's in Andalusia, it's about Spanish people, but they just tend to forget that there is so much influence from India, from Africa, of course, from all those people around flamenco. And I think it's really important for people to know that because of all the history behind, because of the slavery, because there were like a lot of people coming from North Africa and Africa as well, and
mm-hmm,
because Cadix and Seville were like those harbor where the slaves were brought,
absolutely.
and then flamenco, like we don't really know the origin of flamenco. So how do you relate now to flamenco? Because I think flamenco has a lot of influence with African dance. There are so many things that I perceive now in flamenco, even though I don't know a lot about
Mm-hmm,
flamenco,
mm-hmm,
that is coming from Africa. Like maybe the connection between the musician and the
mm-hmm,
dancer. Because flamenco at the beginning, it was only the singing. It has nothing to do
mm-hmm.
with the hands and the music and the instruments. So for you, how do you connect? How do you relate?
I think there's so much mythology around flamenco. This is something that my partner talks a lot about. Miguel Angel Rosales, who's the director of Gurumbe. That'll help locate a lot of things. And also, so this thing with India is also a question because obviously, historically, but we're talking now like way back, like I'm thinking like pre 15th century, pre
Mm-mm,
14th century, like the kind of exodus of people
mm-mm,
from Rajasthan, from northern
mm-mm,
India, over across to Europe, and some people say through Egypt, so like there are these two lines, hence the word Gitano, gypsy with Egypt and so on. But flamenco dance, and somebody called Pedro G. Romero writes a lot about this. Flamenco, sorry, not dance. Flamenco as a form, as like a form with a name, is forged in the mid 19th century, so 1840 something, 48, 49, I think, is when we first hear the word flamenco. And so, really, for me and a lot of people, it's a modern form. It's a form that exists and that is urban, that that starts taking place in in the space, in the theatrical space, somewhat potentially like jazz, when there's a class of people who are going to spaces to be entertained. Obviously drawing from popular culture,
mm-hmm,
drawing from, and that's where, and in Gurumbe we see that that's where you see this trail of the songs that lots of the African descendants brought to the Andalusian space, which then became popular, let's say, and the rhythms. So there are all sorts of palos, all sorts of styles that were known to be attributed to the African descendant community, like Gurumbe itself, the Kumbe, the Yeye, the Zarabanda, like all these styles pre-flamenco that rhythmically have kind of remained, no, or rhythmic, or have been drawn into flamenco rhythmically, let's say. Um, and so the question with India is like there's a big question. This is almost part of the mythology that has been created around the Roman people as the sort of the great harborers and huge artists of flamenco, who themselves have been looking back to the this ancient sort of Indian time. But in terms of the actual dance and the rhythms, they're not really connected. So a lot of people looking at those questions don't really include the Indian influence as really at all. But yes, obviously, um, the Moorish influence, voice, and obviously the instrument of the guitar, the Andalusian, Castilian influence, then the Jewish influence as well. The large Jewish communities are here, and obviously the African influence, which is the one that is just never spoken of, but that
Yeah.
nevertheless is sort of remains. And as you say, yes, I think has a lot to do with the relationship, because I know that at the moment I'm working with some people, and learning how in many sort of traditional African forms, there isn't a word for music and dance separately. That is like, there is no such concept as music being separate to dance. And flamenco holds that very much so. It's like, as a dancer, you cannot move without the presence of the guitar, the singing. And it's not that they're accompanying you, it's that they're intrinsically totally related and happening at the very, very same time on like a very finite level. Um, And I think in the body as well, the way you have to engage your body to dance flamenco is much more like the way you have to engage your body when you do any African
Yeah.
descended movement, whether
Hmm.
it's in North America, South America, the Caribbean, or on the African continent.
Hmm.
And so to me, there are these values that are invisible, because sometimes people want to find like a particular step. They want to be like, oh, that step comes from that. But to me, it's more like, how do we come to the body? How do we come to the act of creating, which often also happens in community? It's not a composer
Hmm.
who's writing music for some instruments to then make it. It's something that is existing as it's happening,
Hmm.
thanks to all these different people offering their voice, their body, their guitar, their clapping. So for me, it's in those things that I'm understanding it still holds, yeah, like a value system that can still be seen in most African diasporic forms across the globe, despite the genre, whether it is, hip hop, whether it's jazz, whether it's tap. So I think that's how now, because I didn't always know this, or I didn't always understand um, or appreciate this in such a sort of clear way. And so coming to understand those values has really also helped me just to define my own voice, and to be able um, to kind of use it without being afraid. Because obviously, as you come to flamenco as a foreign person, because
Hmm.
I am obviously not from Spain, you're always one very aware of um, the respect you have towards the form and the people who are amazing artists who are um, constantly adding to the form. So for many years, I just was always questioning myself and was just always judging myself, but understanding that the very form has also been been sort of influenced by and susceptible to the prejudices that have made it possible to invisibilize the presence of African descendants. And so I've understood that I couldn't also see myself through those same eyes, because that's the very way in which I keep feeling that it's not possible for me to dance flamenco. So resting on and valuing um, these ways of doing that I understand to be totally in connection with the peoples of African descent who were here has helped me assert my own voice, has helped
Hmm.
me feel freer in dancing, and ironically has made me better at what I do, and made me understand how I have to work, on a daily basis. Let's say just in the studio. So it's been, I feel like revealing that has saved me really, and my relationship with the form, because there was a time it was just like, why am I doing this? It's too painful, it's too difficult, it's too, I feel, yeah, the sense that this isn't what this isn't for me, I shouldn't be here.
Wow,
That's
that's a
this.
lot. That's a lot to take in because, as you said, it really helped you shape who you are today. Actually, it reveals something in you, obviously. And because historically, as you said, now the African people have been made invisible to their contribution to flamenco, mainly because.
Flamenco and everything, I feel like this is only a reflection of how we are invisibilized just in general, in terms of our presence on the planet and what we have and continue to, you know, give to the planet. We're always being written out of all the situations.
But that comes mainly because of the church was also involved in that because the church also owned slaves and they didn't want the slave to be involved in everything that has to do with the cultural thing in Spain, in the country at the time, I guess. But now, do you see it now as you, as a black flamenco dancer? Do you see more and more other black dancer coming in? Is it still a niche? Because flamenco is known like in the whole wide world, but I'm not sure that we just get what flamenco really means. So now, is it now more and more, I don't know if it is the right word, acceptable for people to see different kind of people dancing flamenco, and for
Mm-hmm.
people that were mainly in Andalusia,
Mm-hmm.
are they more open to that possibility, and are they accepting that fact? Or, and people in general, the audience, how do they react by seeing you?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think there are two different things. There's
Mhm.
I think you might find it interesting. There's a Black Flamenco network. They've just started a new website, and it gathers together like all the people who are in relationship with flamenco. Lots of them are aficionados, just people who are learning. Some of them are teachers in the States. There are people in Brazil who are performing. Then there are a few of us here in Europe. Um, so, on different levels of professionalism, but it brings together the growing community of Black people, women and men, who are involved with flamenco. So I think that is changing. Um, Having said that, in terms of the professional scene here in Spain, I unfortunately I do not see anybody else. Esther Weeks is an artist who lives here in Seville, and she does a lot of work around like jazz. She sings jazzified flamenco songs and dances. Um, but in general, there's a long, long way to go. And this question that we're talking about is very new. Like, it's very, very new. Miguel Angel's film came out in 2016, and that, I think, that was like a precursor to a shift in the thinking. Maida Goldberg's book came out, I think, like 2018 or something, Sonidos Negros. Then there's um, oh my gosh, Nick Jones's book on staging Habla de Negros, which is kind of rethinking um, medieval literature, medieval to Renaissance literature in Spain, thinking about the Black voice, because you read all these books, and not that I have, but I'm lucky to be surrounded by people who are doing all this work. There are always Black characters in it, but they're again like somehow written out of people's minds. And he takes a very interesting stance where he's kind of defending a voice of somewhat a certain amount of agency, because I think slavery here obviously took place in a very different way to in the Americas, because there were not plantations, so there wasn't the same idea of segregation in the same way. So to a certain extent, there still was, although obviously completely on the lowest sphere of society, but nevertheless people are in the cities, nevertheless people are occupying sometimes similar spaces. There are hermandades, there are brotherhoods of Black people to take part in processions, so on and so forth, right? Um, so there's this question around agency, which I think is interesting. But in the general public's
Yeah.
imaginary, this is new. People still don't know this history here in Spain. There are very few black people who are here. There are obviously there are some, but in comparison to France and England and Belgium and so on, the numbers are minute. So there isn't a voice to speak about this as much. And on a national level, there's not been any discourse. There's very little discourse around this. Colonialism is kind of entering the space, but obviously more looking to Latin America. So I think there's a very, very, very long way to go in that sense. And then my last point around this is, having said that, my experience has been, and I think that's because there's something in flamenco which goes beyond the the aesthetic. So I think there's always been from the state, from the time of Franco, where they coerced flamenco to represent Spain, as always going to the popular space, to to the people who really had the least power, to then use their form to reflect it back to the world, and obviously really kind of cement it in terms of an aesthetic, what the person looks like, how they're dressed, what their hair is like. That's often what people think of when they think of flamenco. But flamenco obviously is much more than that. Flamenco is all the things you were saying before about how you come to the body, the complexity of the music, the song, all of those things. And so when you engage with that, I have found the audiences respond to that. And if you're doing it in a way that feels true to them, they respond positively. So my real experience with audiences has actually always been positive. There might be people who are surprised to see me, and I've done all sorts of performances from the smallest space to big public squares. I was just showing my mother yesterday, like working with huge singers like Remedios Amaya in a public square with thousands of people watching, and people being so supportive afterwards. They can't believe it. They're like, that was amazing. So I think that that's also the beauty of of truth in a way, is to go beyond um, what people's potential expectations. Even if, as I come onto the stage, maybe some people are like, oh, well, what's this person going to do? But in general, my experience has been positive. Now, in saying that, that does not mean that there can potentially be, and I think there is a great deal of resistance to this question of the African presence in flamenco from the very flamenco community, because obviously, you know, we live in a white supremacist world. That's really difficult for people to accept this national form, as it's like, you know, they'd have to, it's like it's asking for a whole rethinking of history, which isn't easy for people to do, right? So it's complex. It's complex, and I'm somebody who tries to engage in complexity. It's not just straight down the line. Yeah, but there's a lot of work to do, for sure, for sure, for sure.
Will you say that you're one of the few? How many of you are there out there, like actually working as flamenco dancer, recognized by the flamenco community, having a career? How many can you say? Like in Spain, we're like 10, 22. You are the only one in Spain,
I think
actually.
so. Really living from it,
Yeah.
absolutely. As I
Wow.
mentioned, Esther Weeks does work, does a few
Yeah.
performances and so on. Somebody called Nicolia Harrison, I think, who was also a black British woman. She was, and she worked with like Israel Gavan, Javier Latorre, all these amazing artists. But she stopped, and she was just before me. I think she's a bit older than me, and she started when she was really young in England. And I've tried to contact her so many times because she's the only person I know who has been in that professional space. But sadly, I don't know what's happened, but she doesn't want to talk about it. So we've never had the chance to exchange about it. But I really would love to know what her experience is. But other than that, there's a young dancer called Thelma Hobbs, who's wonderful. She's French, and she is kind of coming back and forth. I'm just trying to find her here.
Yeah.
She's coming back and forth to Spain, but I think she works mostly in France now. But I think she and she's so young. I really hope she does really well. There's a wonderful young dancer. He's called himself Xavier Duende. He's a young French guy who's like 19, and I think he could also be absolutely wonderful. So I think there are people coming up,
Mm-hmm.
but in terms of like, oh,
Right
so then
now.
exactly. No, there are a few mixed women.
Mm.
Anna Perez Cruz, but she's also in France, and a beautiful young dancer called Cristina Soler, who was based in Barcelona, but right now she's in the Dominican Republic. So I mean, it's like it's a growing community, but I'm talking, on one hand.
Yeah.
And I personally have never been in like a situation where it's like, oh great, there are two of us. No, not at all.
Yeah, that's crazy, right? That's really crazy. But as you said, it takes time. There is a long way to go, but it's good because at least you're there, and there are other people that maybe a few. But I think it's important to tell those stories. We are here, right? Whether you
Absolutely.
like it or not, we are here, and I think that action is more powerful than words
Mm-hmm.
sometimes. Even though those
Mm-hmm.
conversations need to happen, for me, it's more like I know there is one. I know that
Mm-hmm.
like Yinka Esi Graves, he's there. And okay, like in 2024, you will say, yeah, but it's only her. No, it is her. And other will come. And I think
Absolutely.
that's more powerful for me to see that
Absolutely.
someone is taking over. It's like you taking back the power. And
Mm-hmm.
whether or not people are liking it, we are there and we were always there, actually. And
Absolutely.
I think we tend
Absolutely.
to forget that we were always there because we're part of the world of the humanity.
Of course, of course.
And that's
And
it.
we are here, and that's the thing. It's like we know we exist, which is the important thing. But I will say that it's a really difficult path. So I feel lucky that for some strange reason I don't even know what it is. I don't even know what it is. But I do know a lot of people who've had to give up because it's very difficult.
Mm,
And not just because because of being black, but just it's very, very
it
difficult.
is.
It's very difficult to come from abroad. So my dream is really about young Spanish black people, boys and girls, who see that they could do
Yeah.
something and start in the conservatory at 5,
Mm,
like other Spanish people do. Because I think that you've got all the odds against you when you're starting from abroad when you're older.
mm-mm.
Every single flamenco artist you've heard of, name them. Israel Galvan, La Moneta, Patricia Guerrero, whoever, ask all of them, they started when they were like 5 years old.
Mm-mm.
So one of the things that I always feel is it's about supporting the very young ones to be able to have that same trajectory. It's not just about somebody coming in, and even trying to, because that's one thing that's been clear for me is that I'm not even trying to be that. I'm offering from my place, from my humble place, offering my dialogue and love of the form in its complexities.
Mm-hmm.
But there's not a part of me that even should, and it's not fair. And that's the thing, it's not fair to expect that anybody who hasn't had the same training, that hasn't had the same support, should then find themselves at the same level. And I think that's something that's very important because it's not just about being there, appearing there, it's about being prepared to be there.
Exactly.
And for me, that's what's important. It's about the little children being able to go to the conservatory and be supported to be trained the same way Rocío Molina was, the same way Israel Galvan was, the same way, all of them. So that to me is very important because I think when people don't know about flamenco, maybe there is that sense, it's almost like, but it's like any musical form or any instrument, like, the top pianists have been playing piano all their lives, you know, and flamenco requires that as well in a sense. So I think that setting up a kind of unjust expectation is dangerous as well. Mm.
Yeah, but I think, as you said, I think that the main part is education, educate yourself, and do everything possible to be able to, like, to really show up and say, I know what I'm talking about. I'm able to do that. Not only saying, I'm here, I'm dancing, or I'm acting, or whatever. It's more about working and
Mhm.
less about talent because nowadays people are like, yes, but I'm talented. Yeah, but that's not enough.
Oh,
because it's like
absolutely.
5% talent and 95% of work, and you have to work on your craft all the time, all day, and you really have to be the best in what you're doing, even though you know there is competition. But as you said, we need to have the same chance. I think that most of the younger generation are looking for people to be able to identify themselves,
Yes, yes.
and that's perfectly logical. But for me, in my experience, I didn't need that because I knew there were people
Interesting.
like me. I think it's coming from also your upbringing, my childhood, the parents you have, like the education you have. And when I'm speaking about education, it has nothing to do with school. But
No,
I,
no, no,
I
absolutely.
didn't need those examples because I am an actress, I am an artist. But I've always knew there are people like me. Because it is impossible for me to think that in this world there were just only white people and blonde girl. You know what I mean? So I knew
Absolutely.
that. So I didn't
Same for
need
me.
that. You know what I mean? I said, if those people can do this, it isn't possible for me to just think, oh, there are not no black people able to do that. It is for me in my mind, it is impossible, and also it has everything to do with history. People tend to think that the history of Africa began with colonization.
Exactly
You
right.
have to go way back,
Of
you know.
course, of course. And I completely agree with you. It is about education, and I think that maybe the whole thing that there was nothing, and I feel this in terms of, some people speak about like, oh, as a woman, I'm like, I've never had that sense. My mother has been like, you know, this incredible person,
Yeah,
lawyer, doing these things. It was never like there was never a sense in my house, just not one sense that like as a woman I couldn't do this, and there was
exactly.
never once a sense that as a black person I couldn't do it. It just
Mm,
wasn't even in our mentality. It just was didn't exist,
yeah,
did not even exist. So it's true that maybe potentially the only thing that I've just kept going in because I'm interested in it, because I just wanted
exactly.
to keep going and
Mhm.
not, even though I've had lots of challenges and struggles, but there has just been something that's kept me going, because despite not having any references, never seeing a black person dance flamenco, like not once, never, it wasn't, yeah, it wasn't an impossibility. It just, yeah, my brain doesn't even, couldn't
Mm-mm.
even understand that. So I think that you're totally right, because we were educated in a way that I suppose now would maybe be called very decolonial, where it's like,
Mm-hmm.
our barometers were not really Eurocentric, even though obviously they were. I went to a French school, all these sorts of things, but at home we were being offered other references. And so I think that just, and also we lived abroad. You started the interview asking about where I'd lived, and I think that makes a huge difference. We lived in
That's true.
countries where it wasn't just white people. So I think
True.
that also helps, for sure. Absolutely.
Thank you so much for taking the time. What can I wish you for the future? What do you want? What is your next step? Because I know you have a solo project, The Disappearing Act.
And so the Disappearing is like my first solo project. And now, I suppose I would love to be able to continue being able to work the way I've
Mm.
found that is important to me,
Mm-hmm.
and also develop this very connected to everything we've been speaking about, sort of didactic way of
Yeah.
sharing and teaching flamenco as well. Those are the two branches. I'm also in a collaboration with another artist. I just hope that I can continue working. That's what my dream is for me.
Mm.
Because I think that another thing in all of this is I don't want to just be used as like, oh, there she was.
Yeah.
No, I want to be able to have, continue developing,
Mm-mm.
continue expressing, continue sharing, continue working. That's what I hope for myself and for others. That it's not just like, oh, well, there was one and we let her
Yeah.
do something and then that was the end. No, that's
Mm-mm.
not good.
So that's what
So
I wish for you. So good luck.
thank
Thank you
you.
so much.
Thank
And
you very much.
we'll keep in touch. Thank you so much,
Absolutely.
Yinka.
Thank you for your interest.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Bye
Take care.
bye.
See you. Bye bye.